So again, today we are going to be implementing our GUI. We're going to be implementing the different components, the add button, the delete button, modify, all that different stuff. So I've changed my GUI up a little bit from last time. Couldn't figure out how to overlap them or overlay them. So what I did was, this is my main GUI. My main GUI, all it does is consist of a list. So this would be a list of all my devices. An add smartphone, add camera, modify, and delete button. All right. And what I want this to do is, if I click add smartphone, it'll pull up another screen or another GUI so I can add in all my smartphone information. If I click add camera, it'll pull up another GUI. If I click modify, it'll pull up another GUI based on the type of whatever device I click. And then I can modify the information from there. Lastly, the delete, depending on which item I select, I can delete it, so on and so forth. All right. So I'm just going to show you those other GUIs that I made. So for the smartphone, this is what the smartphone GUI looks like. If you remember, the smartphone had a type, manufacturer, all this stuff. It has an owner, a phone number, and a carrier. Smartphone also has a camera. So here's all the camera information for the smartphone. Okay. The camera GUI, it just has the type, manufacturer, model, all that stuff, and then the megapixels. So the camera GUI is a little bit simpler than the smartphone GUI. Here's the smartphone. Here's the camera. So on my main GUI, when I click add smartphone, I want this screen to pop up. If I click add camera, I want this screen to pop up. Everybody following?
Yes, sir.
All right, so if y'all create this separate GUI, by default, when I hit, I'm just gonna run this. When I hit the exit button, by default, it closes my program, right? It ends my program. That's okay for this GUI, right? Because this is the main GUI. Once I close out of this, I want my program to end. But for this GUI, I don't want it to end. If I hit the close button, I just want it to go back to this GUI, right? And I created this one the same way as the other ones. I right-clicked on the package, new JFrame form, and I just named it smartphone GUI. I added in all these text fields, so on and so forth. And again, by default, even this one, if I hit the exit button on here, it would close my whole program. But like I said, this one is a little bit different. I don't want it to close my whole program. I just wanted to close this GUI. So over here in the properties menu, the default close operation, by default, it's exit on close. And that would close the entire program. I want it just to hide. I want it to hide that GUI. All right, so I clicked hide. That way, when I hit the exit on this one, it won't close the whole program. And I'll show you that once I start implementing things. All right, so if you think back to our labs and assignments, we have something like this, where we have an array list. And for this example, we have devices, but for our labs, we had automobiles. For our assignments, we had athletes. And we could add a device, remove a device. We could do all this through the console, right? Now we're doing it through the GUI. So all of this information will be done in our GUIs. But a common component that we can use in our GUIs is this array list. And that array list can hold all of our devices. All right. So we go back to our GUI, our main GUI. We have our design right here. If I go to source, this takes me to my source code. And if you notice, in my source code, I have public class GUI extends javax.swing.jframe. That's just what it extends. It extends the JFrame. Then we have a constructor, public GUI. It calls the init components method. That init components method was generated by NetBeans, so you don't have control over that method. You'll also know that there's a main method in here as well, which makes our GUI runnable um, as as our project. We can hit the run button and it makes this class runnable. And if you notice in my main method, this is what was in here by default. All right, and it says run, and basically it'll just say new GUI. Well, I create an object of the GUI, set the visibility equal to true. Then I set the location relative to null so that when I run this, my GUI pops up in the middle of my screen. All right. So I encourage you all to do something similar to this so that your GUI pops up in the middle of your screen. What you have to do is create an object of your GUI. Right? My GUI class is called GUI. Set the visibility equal to true. Then set location relative to null. And it makes your GUI pop up in the middle of your screen. Now you can still move this and everything, but by default it pops up in the middle of your screen. Everybody with me so far? I'm gonna assume so. So for today, we're just gonna work on adding smartphone and cameras. All right. On Wednesday, we'll talk about deleting and modifying. So today we'll just add. So again, I want to have an array list that holds all of my devices. Okay. So just like any other class, this is a class, so private array list is going to hold a devices. So I just made a class variable, and of course I have to import array list. I imported array list up here. Now inside my GUI, inside my constructor, I'm going to initialize that array list. So now I have an array list. Okay. Cool. Another thing we want to do is for our GUI, if we go back to our design, this list right here, it functions based off something called a default list model, right? A default list model, and that model is what holds all of our items. So item 1, item 2, item 3. By default, this is what our list has, but we don't have item 1 and we have item 2, item 3. By default, we don't have anything in our program unless we read it from a file. So what I'm going to do now is create a default list model. I want to make this a class variable as well so I can access it anywhere in my class. Private default list model. And then we have to import default list model up here. Now in our constructor, we would say list model equals new default list model. And then if we go all the way down here, we find our J list. Let's see, where's our J list? Here we go. Our J list, it's called our device list. And if you remember, our J list is this component right here. It's the list, the visual list. And it works off something called a model. So our device list, we have to set the model equal to what we just created. Device list dot set model, list model. All right. This list model, we haven't added anything to it. So when I run this, our list should be empty. See, now we have an empty list. But this list model is working. It's running off of our list model to build this list right here. There's just nothing in it. It's empty. All right. Cool. So I've set my list model, my device list model to this default list model, right? So again, this list model, we haven't added any items to it, so it doesn't have any items that are populating the list yet. But we'll do that once we start adding smartphones and adding cameras. So if we go back to our design, this is our beginning design. Again, we have these buttons. Buttons, when you click on them, it fires off an action, right? There's an action. And we can respond to that action when somebody clicks on it. So for example, if I hit run, when somebody clicks on this, I can respond to that. That's an action performed. Basically, to respond to that action, what you want to do is, what you're telling the code is, when somebody clicks on this button, run this code. So in order to get to that action performed, you double click this button inside of the design view. And it takes you to, my button was called add smartphone button, action performed. Right? And it responds to an action event. The action event is somebody clicking on the button. Again, if I go back to the design, I double click this button, it takes me to my action performed method. So that when somebody clicks this button, this is what will be, the code inside this method will be run. So if I do a system.out.println, smartphone button clicked. This should work. It may not, depending on how the threads are. See, smartphone button clicked. Do it again, smartphone button clicked. It's going to keep doing that. All right, over and over again. That's the smartphone button action performed. And if we go back to my design, if I right click here, change variable name, that button, the variable name is add smartphone button. So that's why I was changing all those variable names, so that I knew which one I'm clicking on. If I didn't change these variable names, it would just say button 15 action performed. That doesn't really tell me much as a programmer. So I changed the variable name so that when I go here, it says add smartphone button action performed. It tells me that the smartphone button is the one that's been clicked. All right. So again, when we click this button, we want this GUI to pop up, all right, and so that we can add in all the different information into this GUI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create those GUIs, right? I'm going to create them, but I'm going to set their visibility equal to false by default. That way, you don't see them when I create them. But inside this method, I can set the visibility equal to true, and they pop up. All right. So up here, I'm going to create a smartphone GUI. Private smartphone GUI. Smartphone GUI. And I'm following the same name that I named my smartphone GUI. I named it up here smartphone GUI, so I can create an object of that, right? I can create an object of this GUI. So that's what I'm doing right here. Create the reference. Inside my constructor, I'm going to say smartphone GUI dot equals new smartphone GUI. So I create the object, and then I'm going to say smartphone GUI dot set visible to false. By default, I don't want it visible. Okay, by default. However, when I click on add smartphone button, I do want it visible. So inside this method, smartphone GUI dot set visible to true. I'm also going to do smartphone GUI dot set location relative to null, just so it pops up in the middle of my screen. All right. Just to recap, I create a smartphone GUI object, and this is my smartphone GUI. I create the object down here, by default, when I start my program, by default, its visibility equals false, right? When we do the add smartphone button, when somebody clicks that, I want to set the visibility of that smartphone GUI to true and the location relative to null. So if I hit run, here's my default GUI again. I click add smartphone. Now my smartphone GUI pops up. Close it, close it. And again, I go to my smartphone GUI, and over here, I have the default close operation to hide. If I left that as default, exit on close, if I left that as exit on close, what you'll see is I run this, add smartphone. If I exit out of here, it's going to close the whole program. I don't want that to happen. I want the smartphone GUI to hide when I hit that exit button. So it hides it. But my other one still works. So that's why I did the hide over here. Everybody following with me so far about the action performed and why I did the smartphone GUI the way I did it? The thumbs up would be good. Doriantis Panache. Josh.
Yes, I hear
I
you.
got lost a little bit.
I had sent you a message to Mr. Brown before class, like on here. Can you hear me?
Oh, hold on. All right, say that again.
I said I sent you a message on the chat.
I got it.
Okay.
All right, so I'll keep going. So again, we have this array list.
Good question.
All right, go ahead.
Is there a way so I can get back to this video again? Because
I'm gonna post the video.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Because I need a little bit of, like, on my own, you know.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
All right, so again, we have this array list, our devices. The array list is not a GUI component. It is just an array list like we've been using. So it should hold all of our devices. The list model, again, that's just to display it up onto our GUI. But this array list is what holds all of our devices, or all of our device objects, right? So I want to share that array list across my GUIs. I want them all to use the same array list. And if you remember, when we pass array lists to methods, it's passed by reference. So it will be a reference to the same array list in memory. It won't be a copy of it. So what I'm going to do is, for my smartphone GUI, if I go to source, I'm going to create an array list in here as well. Array list, device, devices. And what I'm going to do is pass an array list in the constructor and set the class this.devices equal to the array list that's passed in the constructor, right? So this is a class variable, and I'm setting the class variable equal to an array list that I send to it through the constructor, right? Reason being is I create the array list right here, devices equals new array list. So I create the actual list in my GUI class, and I want to share it with my smartphone GUI and eventually my camera GUI classes. I want to share it. So I'm going to pass it to those classes through their constructor. So I create the array list here, then I pass it to the smartphone GUI class, in its constructor. So I create the array list. Then it gets down to this line. I'm creating my smartphone GUI equals new smartphone GUI. I pass that array list. It goes to my smartphone GUI, and its devices array list equals the same thing now. So in memory, they're all pointing to the same list. So if I modify the list in one GUI, it's going to be replicated to all of my other GUIs as well. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Anybody else unclear? All right. All right, cool. So now, in my smartphone GUI, when I create this, inside the add smartphone button, I want to set each text field, all of its information, to empty strings, right? I don't want it to, when I hit run, add smartphone, I don't want this text field, I don't want this information in here, right? I want it to be empty text boxes. So what I'm going to do is smartphone GUI dot get or dot, let's see, dot manufacturer. It's not going to let me do it because these are all private. Let's see. So what I can do is I'm going to create a clear method. Public void clear text fields. And what I want this method to do is just clear all my text fields, right? So manufacturer or text field, I believe. And let's see, what did I name it? I actually don't need type anymore, so I could delete that. I'll do that later. Manufacturer text field. Dot set text, empty string. All right, and I'll do the same thing for all of my fields. So model text field dot set text, empty string. What else I got? Height, weight, depth, or height, width, depth. Height text field dot set text, empty string. Width text field dot set text, depth. What else I got? Weight. Owner text field is not showing up. All right. Phone number text field dot set text. And then lastly, I think it was carrier text field dot set text. And then again, we have the smartphone. It has a camera, all that information. So camera, manufacturer, text field dot set text. So I got to do all this information for the camera as well. Camera with text field dot set text. camera depth, camera weight, camera, what else do we have? Megapixels. All right. So I create this clear text fields method so that now in my GUI class, I can call .clear text fields. And that should, when I call .clear text fields, it goes to my smartphone GUI and it clears all of my text fields. Hopefully, let's see if it works. Yep, all of my text fields were cleared. And I'm going to delete these types because I don't need that anymore. Delete this, delete that. All right. Run this again. Perfect. So what we're going to have is smartphone. We're going to type in all of our information here. And then all of our camera information over here. Then when we hit add, when I click add, it should hide this, add this to our array list, and populate or add this smartphone to this list as well. All right. All right. Okay. So we click add smartphone button, smartphone GUI pops up. Okay. Smartphone GUI pops up. We type in all this information, then we click the add button. So what we need is an action listener for the add. All right, just like we had before, we need an action listener for our add button as well. All right, so when we click on this add button, it adds it to our GUI. So what do we do for the action listener? We just double click the button. And it takes us to our submit button action performed method. And actually, when I do this, depending on if I'm adding or modifying the smartphone, I want to change the text of that button. So I'm going to create another method that's called set button text. That way I can change the text. If I'm adding a smartphone, it says add. If I'm modifying a smartphone, it says modify instead. So create another method, public void set button text, string text, submit button dot set text to that whatever text we pass in. So over here, I'm going to say smartphone GUI dot set button text to add. I want to say add. Now, when we do our modify button, right, we click on something and we click modify, I'm going to set that to a modify instead. And you'll see that next time on Wednesday. All right. So we go here. We want to submit the submit button action performed, right? So I want to check if submit button dot get text dot equals add. That means we're adding to the list. We're adding a new one, right? Not modifying one, we're adding to it. So I'm just checking for that. Next time you'll see on Wednesday why I did that when we start talking about modifying. So what I'm going to do is all the same things up here. I'm going to copy this, paste it down here. Instead of set, I'm going to say string manufacturer equals text field dot get text. And it's going to get the text from that text field. Our manufacturer text field, which is this one right here, it's going to get the text. So I'm going to get the text from each one of these text fields. String model equals get text. Double height equals. Now again, I could just get the text and that'll get it as a string, but I want to convert it to a double. So double dot parse double get text. Right? I want that height to be a double. Same thing with width. Double dot parse double. Same thing with depth. Double depth equals double dot parse double depth text field dot get text. Again with weight, double weight equals double dot parse double our owner is a string. Owner equals get text. Our phone number is a string. Phone number equals carrier is a string. Carrier equals. Now I can create smartphone. SM equals new smartphone. And then I can say SM dot set manufacturer to the manufacturer. SM dot set model. This should be similar to what we were doing before, except we were doing it through the console. SM dot set height. SM dot set width. Set depth. Set weight. Owner. Phone number. And carrier. All right. Now again, if you remember, if you think back, our smartphones have a camera object as well. So with that being said, we got to create a camera and read all the information for camera. So manufacturer equals get text. And actually, I'm not going to do that because they are different. Model equals this right here. Dot get text. Height equals double dot parse double dot get text. Width equals double dot parse double dot get text. Depth equals double dot parse double get text as well. weight. Get text. And then the megapixels as well. I think it's a double megapixels equals double dot parse double. Dot get text. Use the camera. C equals new camera. C dot set manufacturer. C dot set model. Set height. Width. Depth. Weight. And lastly, megapixels. And then for our smartphone, dot set camera equal to that camera we just created. So again, what we did is we gathered all the text from our text fields. We added that to a smartphone. Then we gathered all the text from our camera text fields, added that to a camera, then added that camera to our smartphone. Okay. So all of that information is being added to a smartphone. And the final thing to do is devices.add our smartphone. So we add our smartphone, this dot set visible to false. So what we did is we add the device to our smartphone and then we set the visibility equal to false. And I want to say what we also need to do is change our list or pass our list over so that we can modify it as well. Let's see. So what I'm going to do is, just like we passed in our devices array list, I'm also going to pass in our list model as well so that we can modify it over here. Default list model. List model. I'm going to pass in default list model. List model. Pass that in, and I'm going to say this dot list model equals list model. So we're passing in a list model to the constructor from our main GUI as well. So the list model that our display list is working off of, I'm going to pass that over as well, so that inside this add method, I can say list model dot add element. And I want to say SM. I'm just going to use the strings SM dot get manufacturer plus SM dot get model. That way it's just going to display that stuff. All right. And then yeah. And that should work right there. Add smartphone, Samsung Galaxy, I don't know. depth, 5, weight, I'm gonna say 2.4, owner, Shaw University, phone number 919, random number, carrier, Verizon. Camera information, I'm gonna say that's Samsung as well. I don't know, just some random model information. Hopefully all of this works. So hopefully when I hit add, it adds it to our list. Here we go. Did everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Again, I'm going to post this video just so that you see, but basically what I did is I have my main GUI, which is this right here. It has a J list and 4 buttons. All right. If I go to my source, my J list is called device list. J list work off something called a list model, and that list model is what actually holds all of the different items, right? So I created an array list to hold all of my objects, so all of my camera and device objects. I create a list model so I can display all those objects, just the names. And I also have a smartphone GUI, which is this right here. This is going to be used in order to add or modify a smartphone. All right. So for my smartphone GUI, I'm passing over my device list, my array list, plus my list model. All right. So that when I click add new smartphone, I set the visibility of my smartphone GUI to true. The location relative to null, that puts it in the middle of the screen. I clear all of the text fields, and I set the submit button text to add. All right. We go to my smartphone GUI. When I click the add button, this add button down here, when I click that, I gather all of the information from each text field, add that all to a smartphone. I gather all the information for that smartphone's camera. I create a camera object. I add that camera to my smartphone. Then I add that smartphone to my devices array list, set the visibility of this GUI, this smartphone GUI, to false so that it disappears. Then I add that new object or that new smartphone to my list based on its manufacturer and its model. All right. So that's what you're going to see. The manufacturer and the model. So if I hit run again, add smartphone, if I do Apple, iPhone, XX, I think it's XX Max, 6.5, the width, 4. I'm just making things up, 0.5, the weight, the owner, again, we'll say Shaw University, phone number, make up a fake phone number, carrier, T-Mobile. The camera information, Samsung makes a lot of the cameras. Model, that's going to be the model number. The height, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. The weight, I'm going to say 0.5 as well. And 4.5 megapixels. So when I create this smartphone, it creates the object, adds it to our array list. Right? That's going to be in memory. We're not going to see the array list, but we will see the manufacturer and model number, or the manufacturer and model, in our GUI list. Apple, iPhone, XS Max. And I can add another smartphone and just keep adding smartphones. Now, of course, this being a GUI, when we add a smartphone, we would want to check to make sure the user has added in something to each one of these text boxes, because we don't want to create a empty smartphone or incomplete smartphone. But that's just additional validation checking that we don't necessarily have to do right now. Any questions about this GUI? All right, so again, this is our GUI. And for my GUI, I have the main GUI right here, which is just a list of all my devices. From this list, I can add a smartphone, add a camera. And when I click add smartphone, I want this GUI to pop up. I can fill in the information for a smartphone. If I click add camera, I want this GUI to pop up. I can add the information for a camera. All right. Inside of this whole project, I also have a camera class, which is basically the template for my camera. I have a device class, which is the super class. It's also abstract, so I cannot create an actual object of the device. But a device has several different characteristics. I also have a smartphone class, which extends from device, is a subclass of device, which adds its own characteristics as well. So that's just a general overview of my project. Another thing you might want to look at as you are building more complex projects is how you organize your project. So you look over here, I have my source packages, then I have this lecture 17 package. Well, if I know I have classes that all do the same thing, I can put all those classes into a different package. For example, I would put my UI elements or my GUIs, user interfaces, into a separate package. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to right click, new, Java package. Now you don't have to do this, but it helps organize your project. So now you see over here, I have a UI package. I'm going to take my GUI, smartphone GUI, and camera GUI, drag those into that UI package, and then hit refactor. And you see now my project, I have a UI package that has all my UI elements or GUI elements. And I have a lecture 17 package that has all my, I'm going to call these components. So I'm actually going to rename this, refactor rename, components. And typically you do want these package names to be lowercase. So I'm going to lowercase this to lowercase UI. And I cannot because UI already exists. So UI, I'm going to say _2. And then I'm going to rename this again to UI. All right. So you typically want these package names to be on lowercase. So that's what I've done here. So let's implement how to add a camera. So I have my main GUI. Again, when somebody clicks on this button, that's called an action event. So in order to respond to an action event, we need an action performed method. In order to do that, just double click on this button and it takes you to your action performed method. Add camera button action performed. And this add camera button, this part right here corresponds to whatever you named this button, this button variable. So if I right click, change variable name, I named it add camera button. So when I double click this action performed corresponds to add camera button. Makes it easier for you. So when we add a camera button, there's a couple things we want to do. We want the add camera GUI to pop up. We want to set its location relative to null. We also want to clear all the text fields so that there's nothing in those text fields. And the submit button. So we go to our camera GUI. This submit button, I want it to say add. I don't want it to say submit. I want it to say add. And if you remember back in my main GUI, I have a smartphone GUI. That's kind of like a static smartphone GUI. I'm going to either make it visible or I'm going to hide it, right? It's always going to be there, but it's just not going to be visible. I want to do the same thing for my camera GUI. So private camera GUI, camera GUI. All right, I'm making a class variable so I can access it throughout my entire class. Then I'm going to say camera GUI equals new camera GUI. And if you noticed, for my smartphone GUI, I passed in my array list of devices and my list model, which basically the list model is this list right here. The reason I did that is so that I can modify them from the smartphone GUI class, right? If I don't do this, I can't change anything from this class. I can't change anything from in here. But since I passed these two objects to my smartphone GUI, and now I'm going to pass it to my camera GUI, I can modify them from inside that class. So I'm passing in my devices array and my list model. Again, the list model is what populates this list in the GUI over here. I also want to set my camera GUI set visible to false. I don't want it to be visible. So my camera GUI, I know I'm going to have an array list, private array list devices. And I'm also going to have a private default list model. That's going to be the list model. And if you remember in Java, we do pass by reference. So technically in memory, when I send these two objects over, I'm sending a reference to them. So in memory, it's still referencing the same object, right? So any modification I make in whatever class it is going to modify the original object, not a copy of it. So my camera GUI constructor, I want to pass an array list and a default list model. And I want to set my classes array list to the one I pass in as a parameter, and my class list model equal to the parameter as well. This is why it was so important to understand constructors. Right? Constructor is what's called when you try to create an object of this class. Over here, I'm creating the object. So I'm calling the camera GUI constructor. I pass in the devices array list and the default list model. I go over here in my camera GUI constructor. I'm setting the class variable this.devices equal to whatever is passed in, and the class variable list model equal to what's passed in as well. Everybody following so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Next thing I want to do, when I click add camera, I want to clear all the text fields. Right now, they have some stuff in them, and depending on what else I click, they may have other things in them. But I know when I click add camera, I want these text fields to be empty. I don't want nothing in them, right? So if I go back to the source, I'm just going to create a method called clear text fields. Public, and it's going to be void. It doesn't return anything. Clear text fields. There aren't any parameters. I already know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go through each text field and clear them. Luckily, I already wrote all this code over here. So I'm just going to copy this. Copy this over. Basically, what I'm doing is the manufacturer text field is this one right here. Manufacturer text field. The model text field is this one right here. Model text field. Height, width, depth, weight, and megapixels. I'm going to delete type because I already know it's a camera. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Yep. All right. So type, I don't need type anymore. But I do have megapixels, so I need to add that. Megapixels text field dot set text empty string. All right. So that clears all the text fields. I also want to create another method that changes set button text add. I want another method that changes what this button actually says to add, just because we're adding a new camera, and it's called the submit button. So I'm gonna go over here, submit button dot set text add. I just wanted to say add. Right? I'm just changing the text that it says. So now in my GUI, when I call add camera button, again, we want a camera GUI. We want to set it visible to true. We want it to pop up. Camera GUI dot set location relative to null. I also want to say camera GUI. Now I want to clear all those text fields. That's why I made that method. And camera GUI dot set button text add. All right. Now this one up here, I did it differently. So let me do that. Let me change this. Set button text, and this will come in handy later on. String text. I'm going to set that equal to text as a parameter, and I'm going to pass in add. All right. So now, again, when I click this camera button, I expect it to go here to this action performed, set the visible equal to true, set location relative to null, clear text fields, and set button text to add. So let's test this. So again, we have our main GUI. If I click the add camera button, again, I expect this code to run. And it works. It pops up. Perfect. Now let's add something from our camera GUI. So if we hit the submit button, it goes to the action performed again. And I want to check to make sure that it adds it to the list, but I want to check to make sure I'm adding and not modifying. The way to do that, if, let's say, string button text equals submit button dot get text, right? If button text dot equals add, I want to add a new object, right? So again, what we need to do to add a new object is gather all the text fields, all the information from these text fields, create a camera object, and add that information to it. Then we add that camera object to our array list. We add the manufacturer model to our list model so that it displays on our list. Again, in my GUI, my smartphone GUI, I did a lot of this. So I'm going to just copy this over. I gather the manufacturer, model, height, width, depth, and then double megapixels equals double dot parse double megapixel text field dot, is it not megapixel? Megapixels text field dot get text. Then I want to create a camera object and set equal to all this information. So again, I have this over here. So I create a camera. I'm taking the manufacturer from the manufacturer text field, the model from the model text field, the height, I'm parsing it into a double from the height text field, so on and so forth. So I'm converting it to a double. I'm converting all of these to doubles. Then I'm setting in the camera, I create a camera object. And I set the manufacturer equal to the manufacturer up there. I set the model equal to the model up here. The next thing to do, add camera to array list. So if you remember, our array list was called devices.add C, which is what I named my camera up here. Add camera, manufacturer, and model to list model for display. Next thing is to do list model dot, I want to say add element, and I want to add the element, the name of my camera. So C dot, or the manufacturer, that get manufacturer plus a space plus C dot get model. And that's what's going to display on my list. So now if I run this, add camera, manufacturer, Samsung. Actually, let's do a Canon. I don't know their cameras, so I'm just going to make something up. MP. Height, let's say it's 5.5 inches. The width, 3.2. Depth, 1.5. The weight, let's see. The weight, I'm going to say it's 4 pounds, and then it has a 4.5 megapixel camera. And you see the button down here, it says add. I add it, and then it adds it to the list. I do need to hide this, but I'll set that in a second. So unfortunately, I added 2 cameras to this list because I didn't hide that GUI after I add the camera. So I need to hide the GUI. So to hide this GUI, hide GUI, I want to reference this. So whatever this is the GUI, this class dot set visible to false. After I add the element, I want to set the visibility of this GUI to false. I also want to clear the text fields, just because I feel like it. Add camera again, Canon, MP, 5.5, the width, 2.7, depth, 2.7, weight, I'm going to say it's 1 pound, 5.6 megapixel. I hit add, and it hides that GUI, and now we have this Canon camera over here. Everybody following? Everybody following? Yay, nay? All right. All right, so that's how you add. The next thing I want to do, if you notice by default, I have modify and delete buttons. I have them disabled. Because if there's nothing in this list, there's nothing to modify or delete, right? But I want the user, when they click on something in the list, I want the modify and delete buttons to pop up and be enabled again. So I'm going to go here, events. I want to say it is a, let's see. I don't think it's, it is events, and I want to say it's list selection value changed. Let's see if that's it. System.out.println value changed event. Let's see if this is it. I believe it's the value changed. run this, add camera, Canon, NP, whatever, add. Okay, so it's gonna require me to type some stuff in here. Let's see. Yeah, so value changed. Let's add another smartphone. Another camera, I'm sorry. Samsung camera. Put some random numbers in here. Add. Yep. So when you click on this, the value changed event fires. You see it's popping up down there. All right. So basically, source, value changed. When the value changes, all I want to do is check if modify button dot is enabled. But I want to check to see if it's not enabled. I want to enable it. Modify button dot enable. I also want to check if not update button dot. It is not update button. What is it called? Or delete. Delete button dot is enabled. I want to enable this one as well. Delete button dot enable. So it looks like enable is deprecated. So let's see what the alternative is. Let's see if there is an alternative. Set enabled. So it was deprecated and replaced with set enabled. So we want to use whatever is no longer deprecated. Deprecated just means that they're phasing it out. So if the device list changes, I want to enable these two buttons if they're already disabled. If they're already enabled, don't even worry about it. So now when I run it, add a camera. If you notice, they're disabled right now. So Canon, put in some random numbers and add. And now they're enabled. All right. The value changed, so now they're enabled. Okay. So the next thing to do is when I click on this Canon MP34, if I click modify, I wanted to pop up the Canon MP34 is a camera, right? I wanted to pop up the camera GUI with all the information for that Canon MP34, right? So let's do that. Whatever I add in there is for that Canon MP34. So if I hit the modify button, we double click it, takes us to the action performed. The modify button, I want to get the current index of the list. That'll tell me which device is selected. And index equals list model dot get. It's not list model, it is probably the devices list. Whatever that list component is, device list. Dot get selected index. That gets me the index of whichever device is currently selected. So if I select the first one, that'll give me index 0. If I select the next one, index 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down. Right? And if you remember, that list also corresponds to our array list. So whatever index is selected in that list is whatever index we need to access in our array list. So I'm going to just say if, and to make this easier, device selected equals array list dot get, array list, devices dot get index. And if you remember devices, that's the name of our array list up here. All right. Device list is the name of our J list, which is the GUI component. It's quite confusing because they use list a lot. But just to recap, our array list is an array list. It's like an array. It can grow and shrink. It's in memory. There's no visual components to an array list. The J list is what you see. It's this right here. In order to add elements to that J list, we need something called a list model, which is what we created up here, default list model. All right, just to recap. So device selected equals devices.getIndex. So that's going to be, that's just a reference to whichever device was clicked on. So now we can check if selected, if you remember instance of camera. I have to add in the camera class. So if it's an instance of camera, can anybody tell me what I want to do? Can anybody tell me what I need to do right here? If the selected device is a camera, instance of camera.
Don't you want to make the camera thing visible?
Exactly. I want to make the camera GUI visible. I also want to populate each field with the information from this device. So let's do that right here. I'm going to say camera GUI dot populate text fields. And I'm going to pass in this selected camera. Now I don't have this method yet, but I'm going to create it in my camera GUI. Source, public void, populate text fields. And we want to pass in a camera object. All right. Now we want to, first, let's clear our text fields just in case. Just in case. And then let's set all of our text fields equal to the information for this camera. So manufacturer text field dot set text field, we're going to say camera dot get manufacturer. So what am I going to put right here for model? What should I put right here in this model? Model text field dot set text. Anyone?
Don't you just put the camera name?
The camera
Like
name or the camera what?
Or I mean model.
Yeah. So camera
Canon.
dot get model. Yep. And we would do this for all of this information. Camera dot get height. And this is saying incompatible types. Set text expects a string. So in order to convert a double to a string, you literally just concatenate it. Same thing down here, camera dot get weight plus a string. here, camera, get depth plus an empty string.
You're supposed to put width, not weight.
Oh yeah, width. You're right. I do it again. There we go. Here's weight, camera dot get weight. And then last one is camera dot get megapixels. And there you go. We're setting all of these equal to this. The last thing I want to do actually keep this the way it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cast this to a camera. So camera equals convert selected, just in Java's mind, to a camera object, even though we already know it is. But again, if you think back to polymorphism, this device is a superclass, but it can hold subclasses. We check to see if that object is an instance of a camera, and then we explicitly cast it into a camera object. So now in memory, it's like, okay, now we're gonna identify it as a camera. It's no longer just a general device with camera information. Explicitly cast it as a camera so that we can pass it to this method. This goes back to polymorphism, explicit casting. This is technically a superclass object with camera information. Because it's an instance of a camera, we can then convert it in memory to a camera object or camera pointer. We pass this camera to this method in our camera GUI. It goes over here. We pass in this camera object, and here you go. So when we submit this GUI, we want to take this information and update the camera, right? We want to update it. We don't want to add a new one. But if you see, we pass the camera over here in this method, and we wouldn't be able to access it down here in this method, the actual action performed method. So what I'm going to do is create a class variable so that I can access it throughout the entire class. Private camera currently modified. That way I can access it anywhere in this class. But I do need to set it. So my populate text fields, I'm going to set it down here. Currently modified equals camera. And honestly, we don't even have to do this. I'm doing too much. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to pass in the index. So I can just modify it based on that index. I don't have to do all this extra stuff. Index. Currently modified index. It equals index. And then over here, I'm just going to pass in the index of this camera. That way I can modify the device in my array list with just simply that index. I don't have to change anything else. So I have the index of whatever device is being modified here, and I set it equal as a class variable. I do that so that now down here, I can modify it just based on that information. So I'm basically going to copy this, put it in an else if statement. Else if. else if. For this one, I'm checking if it equals modified. If the text equals modified. And so I do need to set down here camera GUI.set visible true. Camera GUI.set location relative to null. Camera GUI.set button text to modify. So now over here, if you notice, these two methods have a lot in common. Both of these are creating an object from the from whatever the text fields are. So what I'm going to do is take this code. I don't like repeating code, so I'm going to take this, put that up there, delete this down here. The only difference is instead of adding, I want to change. So instead of add, change camera in array list at currently selected index. So instead of devices.add, I'm going to say .set currently selected index equal to C. Semicolon. And let's see, currently modified index. So now what I'm doing is I'm creating a new camera object using the text fields. Then instead of adding it to my array list, I'm just setting it equal to that. All right, I'm setting it equal to this information. So I'm just swapping it with a new camera object. Now for efficiency purposes, you could do it to where it uses the same object. For this, it's not that important. Right? We're just taking the old object, throwing it away, putting a new object in there, even if it has the same information. So in our list model, we don't want to add, we want to, let's see, set, again, currently modified index, and then that information. We're just setting it. So we're basically replacing what is there, adding in this new information. So now if we run this, add a camera, Canon, make up a model, random information, I hit add, I have the camera. Click on this, hit modify, pops up with all this information for that camera. I modify something, so let's change it to Canon new release. Is the manufacturer. Actually, Canon MP 43NR for new release. And they always change one thing. So I'm modifying this, and you see the text down here says modify now. I modify it, modifies the information. If I click modify again, that information is populated in this text field. So if I change something else, the megapixels, they dropped it from 5 to 4.5. I hit modify. You won't see it here until you click modify. And there you go. Now, I know that's a lot. It just takes practice, a lot of practice, and to review these videos over and over again to see how I did all these different things, see why I did different things. Modify, why I did all these things, collect all info. I know that's it for class. The last thing would be is to implement the delete button, which basically what you would do is go to your main GUI, your design, double click delete. So can anybody tell me what you would want to do What's the logic here when we want to delete something? Real quick. What's the logic? What do we need to do in order to probably delete something? Anybody know what the first thing we should do is? Get the index of the selected device, right? That's the first thing. The next thing is remove index from our array list. The last thing, remove index from, I believe, the list model. And that would be it. And that's how you would delete it. So real quick, to get the index, if you remember index, we have it right above, equals device list, which is my J list, dot get selected index. So then my array list is called devices dot, I believe it's remove index. And then list model dot remove index. I want to update the UI afterwards, right? Just so that that removal populates, is replicated. I hit run, Canon, MP95, some random information, add, please don't give me an error, and it removes it. And it's removed from our devices array list, our list model, and our remove index. The next thing we would want to do is check to see what the size of this list model is and see, and then make, modify, and delete disabled again. We can do that if array list dot size, sorry, is devices is our array list dot size equals 0. That means there is no more objects in there. To be safe, I'm going to say less than or equal to 0. Modify button dot set enable to false. Delete button dot set enable to false as well. I want to disable those. So I run this, add camera, Canon, MP, some random information, add, click on it, delete, and you see now they're disabled again. All I can do is add smartphone, add camera. So last week you all created the GUI